Hello viewers, welcome back to my channel Legal Decipher. In the previous video, we had completed chapter 5 of the Indian Evidence Act 1872. If you have not seen that video, you can go and check it. The link is in the description below. In today's video, we are going to go on with chapter 6 of the Indian Evidence Act. We'll go through the chapter and try to understand the substance therein. So if you're new here, please like and subscribe to my channel to get the video notifications. So let's get started. In this video, we are going to discuss chapter 6 that talks about exclusion of oral by documentary evidence. So wherever documentary evidence is provided, oral evidence will automatically exclude, or where documentary evidence is available, oral evidences will be excluded. So this chapter basically talks about the exclusion of oral evidence by introduction of documentary evidences. It starts from section 91 and ends in section 100. So let's quickly go through this chapter. Section 91 says evidence of terms of contracts, grants and other dispositions of property reduced to form of document. So what does this section say? This section says when the terms of a contract or of a grant or of any other disposition of property. So say for example, there is a contract or a grant or any other disposition of property, and there are certain terms and they have been reduced to in the format of a document. So they are not oral, they are reduced to a form of document. In all cases in which any matter is required by law to be reduced to the form of a document, no evidence shall be given in proof of the terms of such contract, grant, or evidence, or other disposition of property, or of such matter, except the document itself. So, wherever it is by law required to be reduced in the form of a document, that means to be reduced in writing, then in those cases, only the document itself will be allowed in evidence, or the secondary evidence of its contents in cases in which secondary evidence is admissible under the provisions herein before contained. So we have already read in the previous video about those cases where secondary evidences is admissible. So in those cases we can give the secondary evidence, otherwise the document itself will be given in evidence. So if we break down section 91, it basically says if law does not require but parties did, what did they do? They reduced the terms of a contract, grant, or other disposition of property to writing, or where the law itself requires that yes, such contract, grant, or other disposition of property should be reduced in writing. Then in both the cases, it can be proved by primary evidence, that is to say the document itself, or the secondary evidence, that is to say the certified copy of that document, if the Indian Evidence Act allows such. So that is what section 91 says. Now there is two exceptions and three explanations. Let's read them. Exception 1 says when a public officer is required by law to be appointed in writing, and when it is shown that any particular person has acted as such officer, the writing by which he is appointed need not be proved. So whenever a public officer is by law required to be appointed in writing, then if it is shown that any particular person has acted as such officer, then the writing by which he is appointed does not need to be proved. Exception 2 says wills admitted to probate in India may be proved by the probate. So a person's will may be admitted by probate only. And explanation 1 says this section applies equally to cases in which the contracts, grants and dispositions of property referred to are contained in one document, and to cases in which they are contained in more documents than one. So it does not matter how many documents are there. The number of documents do not matter. Explanation 2 says where there are more originals than one original only need to be proved. So in the case of multiple originals, only one needs to be proved. Explanation 3 says the statement in any document whatever of a fact other than the fact referred to in this section shall not preclude the admission of oral evidence as to the same fact. So if there is a statement in a document of a particular fact other than those facts that are referred to in this section, then such a fact shall not preclude the admission of oral evidence as to the same fact. Let's move on to section 92. It says Exclusion of evidence of oral agreement. So, when the terms of any such contract, grant, or other disposition of property or any matter required by law to be reduced to the form of a document have been proved according to the last section. That means it has been so proved as per section 91. Then no evidence of any oral agreement or statement shall be admitted as between the parties to any such instrument or their representatives in interest. So, if it is so proved as per section 91, then no further evidence of any oral agreement or statement shall be admitted. So, no further oral evidence will be taken as between the parties to any such instrument or their representatives in interest for so purpose of contradicting, varying, adding to, or subtracting from its terms. So, if we break down section 92, it clearly says when terms of contract, grant, or any other disposition of property have been reduced to a format of document, or if it is a matter required by law to do so, and such is proved in the manner as provided in section 91, then no evidence of oral agreement or statement shall be admitted between the parties for contradicting, varying, adding, or subtracting to the same or its terms. Now let's understand the provisos. Proviso 1 says any fact may be proved which would invalidate any document or which would entitle any person to any decree or order relating thereto, such as fraud, intimidation, illegality, want of due execution, want of capacity in any contracting party, want of failure of consideration, or mistake in fact or law. So these things may be proved, but there shall be no further evidence of oral nature against such document. So proviso 2 says the existence of any separate oral agreement as to any matter on which a document is silent and which is not inconsistent with its term may be proved. So wherever the document is silent on a particular matter and there is a separate oral agreement regarding such topic that such written document is silent about, then in that case, if it is not inconsistent with its term, it may be proved. In considering whether or not this proviso applies, the court shall have regard to the degree of formality of the document, so that the court shall consider. Now, proviso 3 says the existence of any separate oral agreement constituting a condition precedent to the attaching of any obligation under any such contract, grant, or disposition or property may be proved. So, if there is any condition precedent that attaches any obligation under any such contract, grant, or disposition of property, if there is an existence of any separate oral agreement regarding such condition precedent, then that may be proved. Proviso 4 says the existence of any distinct subsequent oral agreement to rescind or modify any such contract, grant, or disposition of property may be proved. Also, if there is any existence of any distinct subsequent oral agreement to rescind or modify any such contract, grant, or disposition of property, that may be proved, except in cases in which such contract, grant, or disposition of property is by law required to be in writing. So if it is by law required to be in writing, then oral evidence will not be taken in that regard, or has been registered according to the law in force for the time being as to the registration of documents. Proviso 5 says any usage or custom by which incidents not expressly mentioned in any contract are usually annexed to contracts of that description may be proved. So if there is any usage or custom by which the incidents that are not expressly mentioned in that contract, they can be proved if they are usually annexed to contracts of that description, provided that annexing of such incident would not be repugnant to or inconsistent with the express terms of the contract. So that needs to be cleared out. Proviso 6 says any fact may be proved which shows in what manner the language of a document is related to existing facts. So any fact that shows the manner of the language of a document relating to any existing fact, that will be proved. Now section 93 to 98 lays down the rules of latent and patent ambiguity. So it is the rule about admission or exclusion of extrinsic evidence in connection with facts contained in any document, whether it is a contract or not. So where a document has been filed in a court and proved, the function of the court is to interpret it so as to find out the true meaning of the words used and to give effect to the true intention of the maker. Section 93 to 98 lays down the rules as to interpretation of document with the aid of extrinsic evidence. Interpretation means ascertaining the meaning of the language of a document or the manner in which it is related to existing facts. Sometimes the real meaning of a document is not clear without the aid of some facts extraneous to that deed. The language of the document is ambiguous and it can be made clear by introducing new facts. Let's take an example. Say, for example, a man makes a will, and in his will, he writes, my estate is to go to my wife and daughter. Now, after he dies, it is found that he had actually 4 daughters. Now, the will in itself is ambiguous. It is not clear as to which of the daughters was to get the property with her mother. Suppose there are 3 daughters who are rich or they are living with their husbands, and the fourth one is actually a widow and he is living with her mother. Then if such fact is proved and it is cleared out before the court, then the court can easily understand that the father meant the daughter who was widow was to get that property. Thereafter such ambiguity may be removed. This ambiguity of the language of a document may be divided into 2 groups, that are latent ambiguity and patent ambiguity. Now, patent ambiguity is that ambiguity which appears to be ambiguous upon the face of the deed of the instrument. So, the instrument or the deed is prima facie ambiguous. Latent ambiguity is that which seems certain and without ambiguity for anything that appears upon the deed, but here is some collateral matter out of that deed that breeds the ambiguity. To be clear, patent ambiguity is that where the language of the deed is uncertain and nobody can be certain as to what does the language actually mean. But in case of latent ambiguity, the ambiguity is not present in the deed, but it is raised by extrinsic facts. The meaning of the deed is plain and clear, but when it is applied to existing facts, ambiguity arises. So it circumstantially becomes ambiguous. So to understand the distinction between patent and latent ambiguity, we can say that patent ambiguity is where the language of document is so uncertain and effective that no meaning can be given to the document, while latent ambiguity is such where the language of document is certain and meaningful but the language of document is not applied to the present circumstances. Patent ambiguity is personal and it is related to the person who executes the document, but latent ambiguity is objective in nature and it is related to subject matter and object of document. No oral evidence is allowed to remove patent ambiguity, but oral evidence is permitted to remove latent ambiguity. Patent ambiguity is based on a rule that patent ambiguity makes the document useless. The rule of giving oral evidence in case of latent ambiguity, on the other hand, is based on principle that latent ambiguity does not make the document useless. Patent ambiguity is on the face of the document and is evident from inspection of the document itself. You can clearly see whether the document is prima facie ambiguous or not, while latent ambiguity is not evident from prima facie inspection of document but becomes apparent when the language of document is applied to the existing circumstances. So now that we have understood what latent ambiguity and patent ambiguity are, let's move on with the sections. Section 93 says exclusion of evidence to explain or amend ambiguous documents. It says when the language used in a document is on its face ambiguous or defective, evidence may not be given of facts which would show its meaning or supply its defects. So, in this case, no evidence will be taken. Section 94 says exclusion of evidence against application of document to existing facts. It says when language used in a document is plain in itself and when it applies accurately to existing facts, evidence may not be given to show that it was not meant to apply to such facts. So when the language is clear enough by itself and it applies accurately to the existing facts, then no evidence will be taken to mean otherwise. Section 95 says evidence as to document unmeaning in a reference to existing facts. So when language used in a document is plain in itself but it is unmeaning in a reference to existing facts. That means it is clear, it is not ambiguous. The language of the document is not ambiguous, it is plain and simple, it is clear, but it is not meaningful as to the reference of any existing facts for which the evidence of such document is given. Then evidence may be given to show that it was used in a peculiar sense. So that evidence will be taken. Section 96 says evidence as to application of language which can apply to one only of several persons. So when the facts are such that the language used might have been meant to apply to any one of the persons and could not have been meant to apply to more than one of the persons, of several persons or things, then evidence may be given of facts which show which of those persons or things it was intended to apply to. Just like the example that we were talking about when we were understanding latent and patent ambiguity. Section 97 says evidence as to application of language of one of two set of facts to neither of which the whole correctly applies. So when the language used applies partly to one set of existing facts and partly to another set of existing facts, but the whole of it does not apply correctly to either of them, evidence may be given to show of which of the two it was meant to apply. So say for example, there is a document and the language of that document is such that it neither applies to one set of existing facts nor it applies to other set of existing facts. It only applies partly to one set and partly to another set, but not wholly to any one of the sets. Then in that case evidence may be given to show on which of the two set of existing facts it was meant to apply. So that kind of evidence may be taken. Now section 98 says evidence as to meaning of illegible characters, etc. So evidence may be given to show the meaning of illegible or not commonly intelligible characters of foreign, obsolete, technical, local and provincial expressions or abbreviations and of words used in a peculiar sense. So if the document contains any words that are used in peculiar sense, or if there are any characters that are either illegible, that means it cannot be made out, or they are commonly intelligible characters, or it may be of foreign origin, or it may be a obsolete character that is not used in present day, or if it is a technical character that needs special knowledge or expertise to understand, or if it is a particular local or provincial expression or abbreviation that is not known to common people, then evidence may be given to show the actual meaning of such character. That kind of evidence will be allowed. Now section 99 says who may give evidence of agreement varying terms of document. So persons who are not parties to a document or their representatives in interest may give evidence of any facts tending to show a contemporaneous agreement varying the terms of document. So whoever is not a party to a document or their representatives in interest may give evidence of any kind of facts to show contemporaneous agreement that varies the terms of the document. And section 100 simply says saving of provisions of Indian Succession Act relating to wills. So it says nothing in this chapter content shall be taken to affect any of the provisions of the Indian Succession Act as to the construction of wills. So if a person drafts his will according to the Indian Succession Act, nothing in this chapter shall affect any such provisions of the Indian Succession Act that relates to the construction of a will by a person. So that will be untouched by this chapter. So that's all in this video. If you like my videos, then don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching this video.